Hi, everyone. It looks like we now have 166 attendees and growing. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Phil Valco. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Sustainability at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm so happy that you all are joining us for this webinar. Tonight, we're talking about Solve Climate by 2030, Climate Solutions for Missouri, which is part of a national digital teach-in. I'll be moderating tonight, and we have three great panelists for you. So briefly, I'll introduce them a bit more in a bit. We're joined tonight by John Hickey, the Executive Director of the Missouri chapter of the Sierra Club, by Andrew Linhares, the Regional Director and Senior Counsel of Renewable, Missouri, and by Gwen, Mizell, the Vice President of Sustainability and Electrification for the Ameren Corporation. So John, Andrew, Gwen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're eager to hear your comments. I'll start with just a little bit of sort of webinar function, how we're going to operate this evening. So all of the attendees should be muted. We are going to encourage everyone to pose questions through the Q&A down at the bottom, in your menu at the bottom. We'll be compiling the questions, and we'll have an opportunity to have some discussion once we get through initial presentations. So please actively use that Q&A to pose your questions. You can pose them for specific panelists, or you can pose just general questions to be discussed. So the webinar tonight is part of a larger series of webinars hosted across the United States. Each is talking about state-specific climate actions. We'll open with a welcome by Dr. Evan Goodstein, who's the director of the Bard Center for Environmental Policy, whose leadership has made this event possible tonight. So I'll turn it over to Beth, who will run a short video from Dr. Evan Goodstein.
Welcome to Solve Climate by 2030. Today, universities in almost all 50 U.S. states, Puerto Rico, D.C., and several other countries are hosting state and region-wide webinars focused on ambitious and feasible things that we can all do in our cities, our towns, and states in the coming year to really move the needle on climate change. Here is the most important idea to take home today. What you do locally will change the future. Fact, the U.S. state of Georgia is a top 10 solar state. The neighboring Sunshine State of Florida has very little solar power due to outdated laws and regulations. When we launched Solve Climate a year ago, we could never have imagined that today, entire countries and much of the world's economy would be shut down, with hundreds of thousands of people ill, thousands having passed away, and our health systems overwhelmed. I take that back. We could easily have imagined this. Our health experts and scientists warned us this was coming. After SARS and MERS, they told us this was coming, and yet we didn't take preventive action, we didn't prepare. COVID-19 has shown how fragile our health and economic systems are to extreme events. Our scientists have told us clearly that unchecked, climate change will turn our lives into an unending series of extreme events. Floods, droughts, rising sea levels, pests and disease, more extreme storms and hurricanes, all of this leaving hundreds of millions of people homeless and on the move. We can change this. We still have time to change that future. Last year, the world's top climate scientists told us that we have until 2030, 10 years now, to cut global warming pollution aggressively in order to stabilize the climate at the low end. That warning was the genesis for this national and international discussion today on how to solve climate by 2030. Solving climate in 10 years, that sounds challenging. And yet fixing the energy half of climate change by 2030 is looking more, not less likely than it was 4 years ago. The cost of solar and wind power, batteries, and electric vehicles have plummeted. In many cases, they are less expensive now than the fossil fuel power that causes global warming, and they are getting cheaper every day. Already, utility-scale wind and solar, big solar and wind farms that feed power into the grid, these technologies are crushing fossil fuels in much of the U.S. In Colorado, Idaho, and California, renewable bids are coming in at half the price that the cheapest fossil fuel plants can do. And this is where rooftop solar and battery systems are headed in the near future. On the vehicles front, all the major manufacturers see this coming. Mercedes-Benz announced last fall that they have designed their last gasoline-powered car. Going forward, every new model of theirs will be electric. Combining electric-powered vehicles with the impact of driverless technology, we could see a very rapid transition away from gasoline-based cars to EVs in the next decade. All this progress was the result of a major technology push by national governments. Starting in America in the 70s and then ramping up with the Danes, the British, the Japanese and Koreans, the Germans, and most recently the Chinese and Indians, government policies have brought these industries to scale. And now the market is taking over, and renewables, battery storage, and electric vehicles are on track to deliver power and transportation at prices unsubsidized that will lead to major disruptions of energy markets in the 2020s. Can we get there fast enough to solve climate? Well, this is where you come in. With plummeting prices for renewables and electric-powered transports, the pace of the clean energy revolution will no longer be determined by Washington, D.C. and other national governments. Instead, the core action is going to be in your city, at your electric utility, and in your state capital. The key to solving climate by 2030 will be clearing the path at the local level to rapid deployment of solar, wind, battery storage, and electric vehicles. We need to get rid of outmoded laws and regulations that are holding back the transition. Florida needs to take the lesson from Georgia. It's imperative that we have justice in this transition. We have to make sure that the millions of green jobs that are created are jobs for all, and that everyone has access to clean, affordable power and mobility. Today, in Nebraska and New Jersey, in Idaho and Alabama, in Bangladesh and Brazil, we're going to find out what are 3 ambitious but feasible things that we can do right at home to smooth the path for clean energy and to bring energy justice to our communities. Following the webinar, I hope you will join a group or class discussion about what you can do to make these solutions real. Then, what next? Well, this summer, young people in particular have a terrific opportunity to both support climate solutions and gain valuable job skills in a down economy. The most powerful thing you can do to solve climate by 2030 is to join the political campaign of a candidate who best represents your views on climate solutions. In doing that, you'll also learn how to communicate, you'll gain courage, and most importantly, be part of a creative, strong, powerful vision for the future. COVID-19 is giving us a stark lesson about what happens when we ignore warnings from science. Today, we'll see how 10 years can be enough time to drive the climate solutions that we need, and that the future will be what we make it. Thank you for the work you will do to solve climate.
Well, thank you, Dr. Evan Goodstein, for that introduction. We are the Missouri instance of this conversation. There are conversations like this taking place all throughout the country, which is a very, I think, a pretty compelling thing that we are part of such a national and even international dialogue this evening. I want to note that we are now up to 229 participants, which is wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. Without further ado, we're going to move into the panel portion of the session. Each of our panelists will have a few minutes to share some introductory thoughts and provide some context on the topic from their perspective. We'll then shift to a question and answer session. As a moderator, I'll tee up a few questions of my own to get things going. And then, as I mentioned, for those that are joining later, please use the Q&A to enter your questions. We'll then aggregate those questions, and I'll pose questions from the attendees, from you all. So without further ado, John Hickey will be leading us off. Again, John Hickey is the Executive Director of the Missouri chapter of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club is a national grassroots environmental organization, a national community of volunteers, advocates, and grassroots activists. And their purpose is to bring people together to defend our natural resources and everyone's right to enjoy them. Over to you, John.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Phil. Thanks to everybody who's on this webinar. I appreciate that so many Missourians want to get active on climate because we need everybody to change everything. And the first thing I want to say is that in the state of Missouri, the biggest source of greenhouse gas pollution is coal-fired power plants that generate electricity. That is by far the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. So if we want to solve climate in Missouri, we've got to deal with where we get our electricity from. And that pollution is causing health problems today. As Dr. Goodstein talked about the impact of coronavirus today, we every day for the last decades have had an invisible public health crisis of people being poisoned by air pollution from coal plants. And that creates hundreds of premature deaths every year from the small particle pollution that comes from these plants. And in fact, there's a big article in the New York Times today that said that in cities that have worse air pollution, the coronavirus death rate is higher. So we're seeing some of these crises building on each other and exacerbating the problem. So that's the first point. Missouri's main issue with greenhouse gases is coal-fired electricity, and we are way out of step with most of the other states in the country. We're one of the most coal-intensive states in the United States of America. Therefore, we have a bigger healthcare problem here because of that air pollution. So that's why I'd say we, as Missourians, need to care about climate change. We need to own up to the fact that Missouri's doing more than our share to heat up the planet, and we need to get on the job and clean up our act.
Thanks, John. I think what we'll do is just go through each of the panelists, and then we'll come to the discussion at the end. So next, I'm happy to introduce Andrew Linhares. I've got to navigate, and there we go. Andrew Linhares, again, is the Regional Director and Senior Counsel of Renew Missouri. Renew Missouri advocates for renewable energy and energy efficiency in Missouri, represents renewable energy interests at the Public Service Commission, including their hearings before legislators and in county and city offices. And they bring stakeholders for energy issues together to educate and to facilitate productive dialogue. Andrew, before I turn it over to you, one of the things that I should have mentioned earlier is, as a panelist group, we had a discussion in advance of this conversation, knowing that there are many, many factors that are driving climate change. We decided that we were going to focus this discussion largely on the electric utility sector, not solely, but largely. And again, we recognize that there are many other contributing factors and also opportunities for mitigation that we may touch on through the discussion, but this will largely focus on the electric energy sector. All right, without any more, I'll turn it over to you, Andrew.
Thanks a lot, Phil. Appreciate being here. Please let me know if you guys can't hear me. So as Phil teed up there, I will be talking mostly about the electricity sector. John mentioned in his first point there that, coal plants are the #1 cause of CO2 and climate emissions in Missouri. So that is the relevant sector that I want to talk about. I want to go over in my short time here just a little basics about how energy policy works in Missouri, in states like Missouri. What is going on with wind, solar, and energy efficiency, the 3 clean energy sectors that I think are most important going forward and today. And then where are we going? What can we do in terms of policy going forward? So go ahead with the next slide there, Beth. So just a brief note here on the Missouri Public Service Commission. This is the state body that is responsible for regulating our largest utilities, our investor-owned utilities. Investor-owned utilities are like Ameren and Evergy, used to be Kansas City Power and Light in Kansas City. They are creatures of statute. So these are regulated utilities by state government. They have shareholders. They're intended to make a profit. They have a specified amount of return that they can make on investments that they make, like in infrastructure and new coal plants, wind farms, what have you. So for example, if you're from the St. Louis area, our largest utility in Missouri is Ameren. They're a monopoly, which means that they have a designated territory in Missouri to operate in. Go ahead with the next slide there. So quickly, what are we talking about when we talk about clean energy? Primarily what we're talking about is energy efficiency, wind, and solar energy. Also energy storage now, which is starting to have its moment. There's other sources like geothermal and hydro. The reason I'm not going to talk about those is because they don't have much growth potential. So when we talk about energy efficiency, that's the one we should always start with. It is the cheapest way for utilities and customers to meet their energy needs. So it's kind of negative energy production, but it is by far the cleanest and the cheapest form. We're about a 30th out of 50 states in energy efficiency, seeing major strides go forward. Utilities can encourage energy efficiency through programs, whatnot. When you talk about wind, primarily in Northeast Missouri, but also in other places, Missouri is well suited for wind because we're neighboring two of the best states, two of the best areas in the whole planet for wind energy. So, and wind energy is extremely cheap. Solar energy, its advantage is that it's located at the point of use, primarily. Sometimes it can be located within population centers and wheeled across power lines. Finally, energy storage. We think this really is the area that solves the problem of intermittency when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. Sometimes this gets a little complicated, but when you see the load curves, like the middle of the day when the load is used the most, and then it goes back down, the batteries can help level that out so we don't need this much capacity just for certain times of the day. Next slide here. This is just very briefly, this is the cost of energy for certain technologies. You can see that wind is way down there. I mean, these are revolutionary changes that, again, we knew were coming, but it's really stark to see it finally coming to fruition. Next slide. So quickly before I break here, I just want to make sure that we're mentioning what we can do as a state to address this largest sector in climate emissions, in CO2 emissions, which is the electricity sector, which basically means how do we close power plants and shift to cleaner sources of energy. And as Dr. Evan Goodstein in that video that you saw, as he said, what you do locally will change the world. So I want to talk about 3 different things we can do here. Number 1, we need to remove access to renewables. So this means we have things like called net metering policies that allow people to connect to the grid and produce their own energy with solar. Those caps need to be really high. We need to have no fees or penalties for people making their own energy and giving it to the rest of the grid. We also need to allow companies to purchase with contracts between developers. Number 2, there are tons of utility programs out there, energy efficiency and renewable purchase programs right now. Ameren, Missouri, and Evergy are great examples. They have amazing programs that those need to be maxed out, and people need to be beating the utilities door down with excitement over those programs. And finally, number 3, as a state, I believe it's important to commit us to clean energy, 100% clean energy. Other states have done it. Missouri can do it easily over the course of a couple decades. I think we can get to 50%. I think we will be at 50% by 2030, but we should set our sights much higher. So I'll go ahead and stop for now, but thank you for listening.
Thanks, Andrew. That was a really helpful sort of deeper dive, I think, into some of the comments that Dr. Goodstein kicked us off with. So I'm going to recognize one of the challenges of doing things virtually. As John provided his intro comments, he really just made it through his first point, and I intervened and moved on to Andrew. So I'm actually I'd like to turn the floor back over to John to give him an opportunity to share the rest of his thoughts, his introductory thoughts. So we're going a little out of order, but then following that, we will get to Gwen. So John.
Thanks, Phil. So one point I wanted to make, building on what Andrew just said, is if you look at other states around Missouri, they are much further along with clean energy. Iowa produces 37% of its electricity from wind. Missouri produces 2%. Kansas produces 37% of their electricity from wind. So it's not like this isn't possible. And I'm a native Missourian. I don't think Missourians are dumber than people in Iowa or Kansas, and we can't figure it out. We can do it too. That technology is today. That's not what we can do in 5 years or 10 years. That is Kansas and Iowa today. So I want to identify 3 opportunities I see in Missouri for improving our clean energy environment. The first on wind energy is approving the Grain Belt Express transmission line. It's a high voltage direct current transmission line that would bring wind energy from Southwest Kansas to Missouri. It would provide electricity to 35 small towns across the state of Missouri that are part of the Missouri Public Energy Pool. It would also provide electricity in the St. Louis area, and it would be way cheaper than coal energy. And we need to remove the roadblocks that are being put up in front of it now by the legislature. Number 2, as Andrew said, energy efficiency is the cheapest and cleanest form of clean energy. It's cleaner than wind, it's cleaner than solar. Many counties and cities in the state of Missouri have out-of-date building energy codes. And so we are building drafty, inefficient houses in Missouri that would be illegal to build in other states. It would be illegal to build these buildings, for example, in Illinois, because you couldn't get away with building something so inefficient and so drafty. That is something that locally we can do in Missouri, is get our jurisdictions to modernize their building codes. And lastly, move to electric transit buses. Here in the St. Louis area, Metro just decided to purchase 18 electric buses, and it would provide much cleaner transportation, because right now pollution from diesel buses and diesel trucks, because it's emitted close to the ground, is particularly hard on human health. And that gives an improvement to the impact on air pollution in low-income communities in urban areas. Because right now, children in the city of St. Louis, African-American children, face a rate of visits to the ER for asthma that is 10 times the rate of children across the whole state of Missouri. So right now, the people who are paying the biggest price for air pollution have our low-income children in the city of St. Louis. That is wrong. And it's also hitting low-income children in Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield, you name it. So those are the 3 policy options I think we can move on today, and I will let us hear from the other panelists. Thanks so much, Phil.
Great, thanks, John. And sorry to skip over you the first time around, or skip over your second part of your intro. Well, with that, I'd like to turn to Gwen Mizell. Again, Gwen is the Vice President of Sustainability and Electrification for Ameren Corporation. Ameren, Missouri is the largest electric power provider in the state of Missouri. They're committed to providing cleaner, renewable energy solutions and working to diversify and expand their renewable energy portfolio. So without further ado, Gwen, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be on the call this afternoon, along with my co-panelists, as well as the 229 participants that decided to sign on today. Hopefully, Phil, you hear me okay? Okay, good. Let me just start by saying that I appreciate the comments that we've already gotten from our person who introduced the webinar, as well as my co-panelists. Climate issues are global issues, and so every county, every state, every business, every household, down to the individuals, have a responsibility to play a role. I equate it to the similarities between what we're seeing with COVID-19. Our aggregate success or failure depends on each one of us participating. And so when we talk about climate at Ameren, we don't talk about it in isolation. We talk about it in the context of an overall sustainability strategy. That sustainability to us means that we have to balance the needs of competing interests. And we have to make decisions today, many times with imperfect information that will affect us in the future. So me and my team have the pleasure of leading the effort to define the sustainability effort at Ameren, along with many key stakeholders across our enterprise. And that strategy is one that balances three elements. You may be familiar with the term ESG. It balances, the E is environmental, the S is social, and the G is governance. An overarching goal of our strategy is to, when you start to think about the E part of that ESG strategy, big part of our goal is to make our energy portfolio as clean as possible, as rapidly as possible, but with two things in mind: without compromising reliability of the system and without raising rates or making rates unaffordable for those who can least afford to shoulder those burdens. And so when we think about our environmental strategy, it actually is multifaceted. Number one, it does include the addition of renewables, that being wind and solar, again, as rapidly as possible while retaining reliability of the system as well as maintaining customer affordability. Number two, retiring existing coal-fired plants, again, in a thoughtful manner, consistent with our integrated resource plan that has been approved by the Missouri Public Service Commission. Another element that Andrew and John already spoke about is energy efficiency, increasing energy efficiency. We all agree that that is a really good step so that our customers keep more of their disposable income and consume their energy more efficiently. And lastly, a continuation to focus on innovation, because in order for us to get to that idyllic net zero 2050 view, there has to be additional innovation that occurs that bridges the gap between where we are now versus where we want to be in 2050. The S part of our strategy includes ensuring that our customers and our communities thrive, and that we actually are working to better those communities. And a key part of what you're seeing now going on with COVID-19, really ties back to some of the steps and efforts that Ameren's taking. We've demonstrated that commitment to our community. Thank you. We've demonstrated that commitment to our community by suspending disconnects for our customers during this time and forgiving late payments, as well as standing up about $2 million in energy assistance programs that will be administered through various nonprofits, United Way, as well as Heat Up St. Louis being two of those nonprofits. But the S part of that ESG strategy really points to how we are helping to build small and diverse businesses, how we're helping to educate students in under-resourced schools, offering apprenticeship jobs to non-college degree professionals who might not be able to work in an environment like an Ameren, but also contributing $10 million annually to nonprofits that are strengthening our communities, as well as volunteer hours. And lastly, as a part of the social construct, it's really important for us to build a diverse, highly skilled workforce that will take us forward into the future. And so for the last 6 years or so, Ameren has been classified as one of the best diversity practitioners in the utility space by Diversity, Inc. The last element of our sustainability strategy that I'll cover is the governance element. And governance just simply relates to the oversight that is provided for the sustainability strategy or the ESG practices to ensure accountability is there. So that measure really looks at your board of directors' skills mix and gender diversity, as well as generational diversity. And currently, 50% of the Ameren board of directors is either ethnically or gender diverse. Last piece of this slide that I'll mention is electrification is a large part of our sustainability strategy. There are more people buying electric vehicles. Electrification is definitely one of the biggest ways that we can decarbonize, not just locally, but also globally. And so we are focused on building the infrastructure to support electrification because it helps us decarbonize, and ultimately it helps us lower the cost across our customer base. Next slide, Phil. So this slide is just a high-level reference, and it's got a lot going on, but you can read it at your leisure. It's really designed to say that we have a plethora of renewable energy programs and innovations that we have rolled out and are sharing. I mentioned that a big part of our environmental strategy is to add renewables to our portfolio. We are committed to add 700 megawatts of wind energy to our portfolio somewhere close to the end of this year. That will be a 700 megawatt kind of addition, which is a huge, huge commitment, a huge investment that we are extremely proud of. But we also have a number of additional solar initiatives that we have rolled out that are either underway or have been rolled out previously. There's a renewable choice program that we offer to our large C&I customers that is already fully subscribed. A community solar program is a program that's available for residential customers and small businesses, as well as neighborhood solar. So you can see there are a number of solar programs that we have. I've already mentioned energy efficiency being one of our most efficient tools for effectively impacting positively the environment. It saves our customers money. Last year in Ameren, Missouri, Ameren, Illinois, we invested almost $200 million across the enterprise in electric and gas energy efficiency programs, with a goal of saving our customers 2 bill payments annually. The Charge Ahead program, which is the orange slice of the pie there, is a program that allows us to invest $11 million in charging infrastructure to support EV adoption. So that will encourage those builders of charging stations to build highway charging along highway corridors, as well as building charging infrastructure at workplaces and around town. And that's a program that we're really proud of that was approved through the Missouri Public Service Commission. And so with that, I will just say as I wrap up, I'd like to just leave you with a couple of takeaways. Number one, Ameren has a well thought out strategy to manage climate change and climate issues. It's largely based on our integrated resource plan that we submit every 3 years, and we are renewing that plan at the end of this year. And number two, that integrated resource plan, which will come out later this year, will focus on new assumptions around energy demand, around the cost of energy, various assumptions that will help us define what our path forward is. And the integrated resource plan extends out 20 years. But at the end of the day, that plan will stick to a narrative that ensures that we maintain system reliability, first and foremost, and customer affordability. And lastly, I will say we have a responsibility to our customers to not only be just a provider of services, but also to be that entity that helps bring equity and support equity in our communities, to offer customers hope and help so that they can keep more of their disposable income, and to help those vulnerable communities to be the very best that they can be. And so with that, Phil, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Gwen. As I listened to the three of you, there are a few things that stood out as interesting challenges and opportunities. So the session is Solve Climate by 2030. And 2030, for those of us that are, older than 30, we recognize that 10 years can pass pretty quickly. 2030 is right around the corner. And there really is an awful lot that we'll need to be doing to truly solve climate by 2030. So I'll get to a question around that, but almost thinking from a frame of design constraints, there's a couple of things that came up that are challenges that also require us to think about solutions. So Andrew, you talked about storage, and storage does get at one of the things that needs to be managed, which is time of use. So certain forms of energy, solar, right? Sun is shining daytime. Energy use is used throughout the day. We need to have more storage within our mix if we're going to get to very high percentages. I mean, really high, aggressively, 100% renewables. So we need to be thinking about storage and what that looks like. Another, John, you mentioned geographic considerations. That the Grain Belt Express project you highlighted is wind that's generated in a different geography that would basically be coming on this transmission line and dropped off in other geographies where there's wind resource, but not the same amount that there is in Kansas or Iowa or areas where there truly is, I think, as you said, some of the strongest wind resource in the country. Gwen, something that you touched on that Dr. Goodstein touched on as well is climate justice and equity, and making sure that as we develop solutions, that they're solutions that really can benefit those with the least access within our communities. And then a fourth thing that came to mind as a challenge, a design constraint, and an opportunity to think creatively is this infrastructure question. So when you talk about electrification, we have an entire sector, transportation, that has been powered largely by fossil fuel for a long time. And we have the infrastructure to support that. We have gas stations all around, and we have vehicles that are gasoline vehicles. To shift to electrifying requires a lot of infrastructure. It's going to require some very strong and thoughtful coordination and broad collaboration to truly shift. So I'll share those four things that came to mind, but I'd like to maybe pose a question to start the conversation, unless any of the panelists want to react to what I just shared. John, I saw you taking yourself off of mute, so I wondered if you had a comment.
Yeah, I thought your point about electrifying transportation is a good example of a place where groups like the Sierra Club and Ameren can really come together, because we want Ameren to sell a bunch of electricity to buses and trucks and cars so that we can electrify transportation, because in the United States as a whole, transportation is a bigger contributor to greenhouse gas pollution than the electricity sector. That's reversed in Missouri, but if you look at the country as a whole, the transportation sector is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases. Climate change is going to impact the whole world. Carbon dioxide doesn't care about state lines. So we can really cooperate on that. And the other place that we're already cooperating that I want to lift up is on building codes. Ameren is funding training for cities and counties that want to move to higher energy codes to train their building inspectors in how to enforce that new code. That makes it easier for those cities and counties to adopt a modern code. And I think that's another great example of how we can cooperate and come together around improving our state.
Thanks for that, John. Gwen, do you have please?
Yeah, I appreciate John's comments. It's always great to see where there's alignment between Ameren and Sierra Club and others. The electrification is absolutely one of those places where I think we align. And as I think it was John that mentioned the 20 buses that are being put into rotation by Bi-State. I know that our Ameren Missouri team has been working with Bi-State on that because there's underlying infrastructure or make-ready infrastructure that's required. You can't just put charging stations in without the requisite electrical, wherewithal to support that. And so I think that as you look at electrification and you think about all the infrastructure, Phil, you referenced, all the infrastructure that's there, like for highways and with regular gas stations, we would have to build all of that out in order to support an electrified space. And so that's where the rub is, because there isn't a national push to do that on a nationwide basis. There are different state level constructs. Each state has its own type of construct that doesn't lend itself to a nationwide pattern or template, if you will, for putting all of that infrastructure in place that has the interoperability capabilities between each part of the system.
Thanks, Gwen. So quick question, or not quick, question for the group. From your perspective, how do we accelerate decarbonization? Again, 2030 is right around the corner. How can we truly ramp up the rate of change to get to where we need to be by 2030 from your perspective? And in whatever order you'd like to go. Andrew, I saw you just unmuted yourself. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, one area that I would like to explore with the group here, and probably because it's the most actionable, that we have, what do we have, 230 people on this call, is what customers, residential and business, can do to either force utilities' hand on the heavy end or offer them a profit opportunity on the lighter hand. And these are numerous opportunities in front of us right now. Like, one thing that everybody could do right now who's an Ameren customer is you can log into your Ameren account and go to programs and select that you want to be participate in their community solar program. This is available to everybody. We could max that out, and that would send a signal to the utility and to regulators that there's a huge demand for this. And just to mention, I mean, that program is going to get cheaper and cheaper the more people come on. Right now, it's a slight premium, a couple extra dollars a month. There's really no reason that it needs to be a premium. It should be a cost-saving mechanism, given the cost of solar, and it will be. Folks like Renew Missouri and Sierra Club are pushing really hard for that to become a customer cost-saving mechanism, particularly for vulnerable populations who could use a break on their bill. So that's one thing everybody can do right now. People who are penned up at home, which is everybody right now, if you own your home, you can do tons of energy efficiency stuff. And that saves you money, that improves the value of your home, that improves your indoor air quality and conditions like asthma and COPD, and saves our healthcare system money. There's 42,000 people in Missouri employed by the energy efficiency industry. So it's a major job creator, more intense than almost any industry in the country. So these are things that customer choice can really drive. And as I said, that sends the signal to regulators and to utilities and to policymakers throughout that this is a service in demand. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Also, businesses have applicable programs as well that they can participate in, like Ameren's Renewable Choice program. If you work for a large employer that is located in Ameren's service territory, you can get all of your energy from a new wind project that Ameren's going to build. So
Andrew, I just saw a quick comment from Debbie asking you to repeat the name of the program. I think it was a community solar program. For a little bit of background, the first phase of that was a 1 megawatt solar installation at Lambert International Airport in St. Louis. Is there any, Gwen, are you able to share anything about, because I believe that first phase was fully subscribed. Is there an additional phase that folks can sign up for?
You're absolutely right, Phil. It is currently, community solar is fully subscribed at this point, but because it was subscribed within a matter of a really short time after it was rolled out, the view is that we'll definitely be looking at bringing that back as another option around that back. And that is probably something that's quite timely, being that we're looking now at our issuing our updated integrated resource plan later this year that will talk about the expectation around additional renewables that we would add to our system, and also take a look at the retirement dates for the existing coal plants. And so that will be available sometime later this year.
Yeah, and Phil, just one last thing to mention about that. As Gwen said, they're in the plans in the works to drastically expand that program. We're certainly going to be pushing for it to be 100 megawatts or greater in the short period. But one advantage of programs like this is that this isn't you going off the grid. I mean, obviously that's available to you if you own your own business or your home. You should look into going solar, but this is a simple check the box, pay a couple extra dollars. That's a real advantage for renters That's a real advantage for people who have weird shade or house orientations. This is available to everyone. And as I said, you know, when this gets to scale, this is going to be something that's going to save money for people. And hopefully we'll have a low income or an income qualified subsidized section that will save folks who need the most help even more money. So I just want to emphasize the ease at which people can do this. Everyone can do this right now if you want to.
But I've got to jump in here and have some disagreement on this panel. Individual action is great, and I am always puttering on my house, which is over 100 years old, to try and make it more energy efficient. Everyone should do what they can, but we are not going to solve climate in 10 years unless we make major change at the policy level, which really requires joint action. Individual action is great, but it is not enough. If we are serious, we need to change the rules and the policy around how we generate power, and that is what we need to do. I may want electric buses, but I can't go out to my curb and get on an electric bus unless there is an electric bus and unless there's new charging stations and there's policies to support that transportation option, et cetera. So I think it's both and we gotta look at the scale of the problem and have a solution that is equivalent to the scale of the problem.
Absolutely.
John, you got a couple of comments, people agreeing with you. So some thumbs up for that. I'd like to, with the time that we have left, I'd like to touch on a couple of the questions that have been raised. So give me just a moment here. Let's see, I saw that Ken, actually Ken and Luke posed questions about the impact of wind turbines on birds. Is that something that any of you feel confident speaking about? The tension between renewable energy and potentially killing migrating bird populations?
I'll take that one, Phil. The Sierra Club intervened with the Public Service Commission on several wind projects in Missouri to change the design of the project to reduce the impact on birds and bats. And there are changes, for example, in the cut-in speed of a wind turbine. And a cut-in speed means how fast does the wind need to be blowing before the turbines start going around and around. If you increase the cut-in speed to, I think it's 6.4 meters per second, you eliminate most of the impact of these wind turbines on birds and bats. You also can look at where you site the wind farms relative to migration paths for birds and bats, so you don't put the wind turbines in the migration path. So as the Sierra Club, we've worked closely actually with the Missouri Department of Conservation, which is a great organization, to get agreements from companies building wind farms to change their design to do simple steps that can make a difference. But we got to keep in mind that climate change from coal-fired power plants is killing more birds than, in buildings themselves are killing more birds and bats than wind farms. So we've got to put the problem in context and have a solution across all those platforms.
Looks like I was muted. John, FYI, your video is off, so you may have accidentally clicked it off when you were unmuting yourself. There you go. Oh, now you're back off. There you go. Okay, good to see you again. We have just a couple of minutes left during the discussion portion. And I'll do one more question that came in. It was a question from Akash about this concept of net metering. He says he's read a little bit about it. Why is this not openly embraced? It seems like it could solve the problem with some outdated grid issues in the US. Akash, I'm gonna just stop there, but I wonder if we could have a little bit more discussion about that, because I understand this to be a point where there is not full agreement between the advocacy community and the utility. So I think it'd be interesting to hear a bit more on the net metering concept.
I can start us off there. I'd love to get Gwen's opinion here as well. But so Renew Missouri we've been working on net metering in Missouri long before I was on staff. It passed in 2007, our law, and our law is absolutely one of the weakest in the country. It's helped thousands of people go solar, but it has a very low cap, which means that if you're a huge business like IKEA or something, you can't net meter your entire system, like a system that addresses your whole load. And that cap to us seems a bit arbitrary. It seems like a arbitrary government restriction. I think the concept of net metering needs to be a non-negotiable nationwide. If folks are able to make their own power and put their excess back onto the grid, they should be adequately compensated for that, including the savings that they cause the grid. When you're putting solar out onto the grid, that means the utility doesn't have to produce it at the plant, and they don't have to ship it across their lines, which causes line savings and all these ancillary benefits. So the proper compensation for net metering is a really big issue, but I just want to address why there might be disagreement about net metering. And I think it's pretty easy to understand if you are looking honestly at the way that utilities are rewarded and what they're incentivized to go do, which is to seek profit. They've got shareholders. They have a fiduciary duty to those shareholders to earn as high a rate of return as possible. And customers using less of their product is not in that incentive structure. So there's a fundamental conflict here with net metering. If it ever became in Missouri, if it ever became a large part of what's on the grid, that'd be cutting into utilities' profits pretty meaningfully. And that's not to cast blame, it's just the reality here. So what some states have done is they've deregulated their utilities, where customers have the choice where their power can come from. And the utilities are there to serve the customer, but their profit isn't linked to necessarily in the same way. Other states haven't gone that far. They've used policies like decoupling, where their rate of return is not directly linked to the volume of sales or the number of kilowatt hours that they sell. So their incentives are based on other metrics. These are policies that we have versions of in Missouri, but not for electric utilities. It's not mandatory, at least. So there's obvious answers to how to overcome these inherent contradictions and conflicts, and all we need is the political will to get it done. It's certainly something that we know how to address.
Gwen?
So Andrew, I will comment. So net metering is definitely a policy tool that can be helpful. I'm not as versed in the specifics of that as some others in our organization, but I know there's a view that it could potentially shift cost burden and potentially negatively impact those who are least able to shoulder that burden. But that is one reason that we have rolled out a number of other types of renewable programs that our customers and our businesses can avail themselves of. But I can certainly, get with the ones in our organization who are more equipped to discuss the specifics of the technical specifics of net metering, and we can carry this conversation on offline.
Well, it looks like we have just a couple of additional minutes. Thanks for that note, Beth. So I'd like to share sort of a combined question from two of the audience members, Britt and Essence. Britt asked about, as voters, who should they be reaching out to? Where are the highest impact areas for people to be communicating and advocating? And then Essence asked about, are there particular policies that you would recommend that people advocate for? And I know that Ameren is interested in some legislative support, probably around electrification, which seems to be an area of agreement. And I know Renew and Sierra Club have any number of policy priorities. So again, who should folks reach out to, and what policies would you suggest they advocate for? Maybe we can just do a quick round robin to end the panel. John, I saw you on mute first. Would you like to go ahead?
Okay, on the policy side, the Sierra Club supports the proposal of 100% clean energy by 2035. We believe that if you don't have a goal, how can you know how to get there? So you need to set a goal, and we feel that it is reasonable to get to 100% clean energy across the state by 2035. And if we have a glide path to get to 100% by 2035, we'll have to be quite a bit along the way by 2030. So I think that is the goal. How we get there, what the specific policies are in terms of net metering or wind or energy efficiency, those details can be worked out as we learn, but we need to have a goal. That's the goal. In terms of geography, I think wherever you are in Missouri is where you should work. If you are in Joplin, work to elect candidates who support the environment in Joplin. If you're in St. Louis, do it in St. Louis. I think as the Sierra Club Executive Director says, to change everything, you need everybody. And wherever you are, you can do something. Even small towns like Stockton, Missouri, which is in Cedar County down in Southwest Missouri, they've got solar panels on their city hall, and their mayor has signed up as a mayor for clean energy. And who'd have thought Stockton, Missouri would be leading the charge? Wherever you are in Missouri, do what you can. I think we've shared a lot of good ideas today on what you can do.
I'm happy to go next. Does that make sense?
Either way, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Andrew.
So echo what John says, 100%. 100% clean energy in Missouri is a physically and operationally a doable thing, and it's a real political challenge. But obviously, your state legislators are important for that sort of goal, and all elected officials are important to reiterate that goal. But I did mention the Public Service Commission at the beginning of this call because that's the world I run in. And, you know, Ameren, Gwen mentioned that they're going to be doing their integrated resource plan here at the end of the year. That's where all the large planning decisions are made, and that is done at the Public Service Commission. So if you want to follow along with that and make sure that Ameren is pursuing the sorts of investment decisions that you want to see, that's a good place to follow along and give your input, and you can track that by following groups like Renew Missouri and Sierra Club.
All right. Well, I will go next, and I will echo some similar sentiments. I think that that advocating at multiple levels makes all the sense in the world. You know, whether it's at the local, state level, the regulatory or legislative level, as well as at the federal level. At all of those levels, we need constructive regulatory constructs in order to be able to invest in a grid that allows for the addition of all the renewables that we've talked about wanting to put on the system, because the grid has to be robust enough in order to be able to accommodate the addition of renewables. We have to be able to build out transmission lines in order to be able to transport wind from those areas that might be more favorable to wind to our load centers. So all of that requires policy input. So I would absolutely agree with that. The one thing I will hark back to is we have indeed already set carbon reduction targets that were a part of our 2017 Integrated Resource Plan. And that those targets show us reducing our carbon emissions down to 80% by the year 2050. As I mentioned, there will be an updated integrated resource plan later this year. And as a part of that integrated resource plan process, there is a robust stakeholder engagement process that allows for interactions and comments from key stakeholders.
Great, thank you, everyone. So we are right about at time. There is a quick wrap that Beth and Teresa will be doing. I want to thank our panelists so much for their time. I want to thank all the attendees for being here. Hillary, if you're still on, I want to recognize that we were not able to get to topics beyond energy. Hillary commented about opportunities for soil carbon sequestration. And yes, there are a lot of other solutions that need to be on the table as the world works to solve climate. So we were limited in scope today, and I recognize that. So quickly, I'll turn it over to Beth Martin, who will share a little bit about a resource, and then Teresa will do the same. So Beth, take it away.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. We wanted to let you all have a couple of takeaways. And so one of the highlights we wanted to share with you is just to share information on the Switch Energy Alliance. This is a website that you can go to, and it has a good many resources where you can dig a little bit deeper into all different types of energy. You do have to create an account, but it is free, and then you can log in and tap into all of their different information. So, and then the very last thing that we wanted to do is we want to get a sense of, for everybody who is here and that has joined us today, we want to get a sense of really where you are and what you're thinking about. So we would love to have you participate in our online, in an online survey. So it's pretty simple. All you need to do, and you can do this on your phone, on your tablet, your computer, is go to the website. You can see it right now on the screen share. It's www.menti.com. When you're there, enter the code, which is again at the top here, 422489. And you'll be able to select 2 different actions that you might take over the next, and I'm getting a note that someone can't share my screen. Can I get a thumbs up from the panelists if you're seeing the to solve climate by 2030? Okay, great, thank you. Go vote, and you'll start to see the dots flying, and so we'll get a good sense of maybe where all of our attendees today, the types of things that you think you may be able to do to move forward. So I'm certainly seeing votes come in. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. This can handle up to, I think, 500 people, so everybody keep going. And while this is populating, I just wanted to take the opportunity as well to thank all of our panelists, to thank all of you for being here with us and for listening to this information specifically about Missouri. If you're interested, on the WashU's Climate Change Program website, we'll also have the links. You can go watch some of the webinars from other states, find the access to more information that we've all mentioned and compiled. And yeah, I think that's it. But thank you all for being here, and we really appreciate it. And it's really kind of cool, actually, to see all of the engagement that you're willing to do. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And with that, I think we will call it a webinar. We really appreciate your time this evening. Have a wonderful evening. Stay healthy. And someone just posted vote, vote, vote. We really appreciate your active and ongoing engagement to help ramp up and accelerate climate action. So thank you all for your passion.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.